It looks like PSA is coming back with their regular service level. I think in a week, right? $90 for regular service.
Yeah, I think it's either going to be this week or next week. I'd be surprised if it's going to be this week. I mean, right now it's Wednesday. We haven't really heard anything yet. It's a short week given the holiday, but 90 would be like the lowest. I think it would be. I think like it would be 100 through PSA. And if you're doing a like through a group submitter, I think it would be as low as 90. I don't know really what turnaround times would be expected though for regular. I know Express is going pretty quick. Have you had experience with Express lately?
I haven't used it. I've thought about it. Probably got a few cards that would maybe be worth it. And some of those I'd have to crack out of Beckett holders. And I'm just kind of like delaying that because I'm wondering if it's even worth doing that and paying an exorbitant amount of money. But yeah, I'm very curious to know because I think this is a huge step for them. There might have been like 0.1% of cards that were eligible candidates in most people's like collections inventories to be sent in prior to this level coming out. But with this level, you could be introducing, start to see a ramp up in activity for sure. And from my standpoint, there's definitely a bunch of cards that I plan on sending. I'm a little nervous about their intake process. They probably had to kind of either fire, rehire, retrain, repurpose existing employees to focus on other aspects of the business. So I'm hoping we're not in another situation where our cards are sitting at PSA for 4 weeks before they're actually acknowledged and checked in officially. So I think that's definitely interesting. One of the things that I think about is why now for PSA? Is it because their backlog is down to a manageable level? Is it because they're noticing that the hobby might be in a little bit of a lull with regards to maybe secondary market prices and the way that things are trending? Are they worried about people just losing interest in grading? Because grading obviously became a huge part of the hobby and a larger reason for why the hobby was able to transform into where it is now and become relevant again. That, in addition to like manufactured scarcity and creating numbered versions of stuff, Jersey relics, etc., grading was just as big of a component. And without most people being able to do it with one of the big dogs, you can still do it with SGC, which praise to them for being able to keep their backlogs down. They've been able to effectively scale, and I don't think anybody expected them to be in this situation. So good for them.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, I think maybe a lot of people are just losing interest in like, okay, well, if I can't grade again for the foreseeable future, then maybe I just won't be as interested in the hobby. I submitted a survey to my subscription box customers and some non-customers, some just people that watch the channel. And a lot of people had said that their spend on singles has decreased as a result of the current status of PSA and Beckett.
Yeah. Well, speaking from experience, I sent a couple cards to PC Sports Cards to get to like for express service, and I think they overnight express cards to PSA because they want to get them fast, or they want to get them there fast. And I think like within a day or so, it was checked in and in research ID, and it's already in grading. It was checked in like last week, and it's already in grading. So I think like Ty on Bench Clear, I heard like one of his express orders took like 8 business days. It's really fast. I think, like at least for me and probably for other people too, it like since March, you kind of had to like change in March, as anyone knows, is like when PSA closed a lot of their services. So you kind of had to change like your grading strategy. And I know I did. I submitted maybe like 20 to 40 cards a month, but I was pretty picky then. And even since then, I've gotten to be pickier with what I submit. I think with the 90-day service opening up, it will allow people to be a little less picky about what they sub, and maybe more confident of going to like, I can take a shot on this card. Maybe I've been holding this card for several months. I have many of those cards that I've been holding for many, many months, just waiting kind of for like an opportune time to submit it. I think people are in that kind of boat too. I actually know people that are, and are avoiding buying raw singles because of that, or have been avoiding buying raw singles. So maybe like, the guys at the card shows that only sell raw, that only sell modern, that have been kind of like getting through the last several months with just like getting stuff out, and maybe like their normal customer isn't shopping as much. Maybe they'll see an uptick in customers and in purchases because the opportunities for people to submit to PSA are opening up. And I think it makes sense for PSA to roll it out. I think they've been doing it. I'll give them credit. I think they've been doing a good job with like pausing everything and then rolling it out slowly, because their model back before March 1st or whenever it was not sustainable at all. And I think Nat said that himself. So
yeah, I guess one of the benefits of not being a public company anymore, you don't have these shareholders kind of like barking down your throat, like, what are you doing? You're turning down all this business. They had the ability to be a little bit flexible there with taking such a pause like that. I would call it a bold move because you have all these new competitors trying to take their business. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next year. How many more service levels that they open, when those open, how much will those be? I think Nat Turner said that he'd like to go back to the days having, at some point having $10 grading, right? Even if it was 20 to 30, I don't think anybody would turn that down at this point. So, and what's going to happen to those competitors once PSA and eventually Beckett fully reopen? SGC clearly has a stronghold on the vintage market. What's going to happen to their hold on the ultra modern side that they've gone after quite aggressively over the last year? What's going to happen to CSG as well as HGA and the other smaller guys? So interesting.
Well, Beckett has been completely lost in this whole thing. Like, we haven't heard like a word from Beckett about anything. Like I'm with you. I give SGC a lot of credit. I've been an SGC customer for a long time, and I'm also a huge critic. Like, I was in Peter's ear for maybe like 20 minutes at the National, being like, I don't know why you're not grading cards at the National. It's a huge missed opportunity for you. And I told him that to his face. And Dave Foreman was right there next to me. And, I think like they had an opportunity, but they've also seized like post-National, and aside from the National, they've like seized the opportunity. I think for like all the other, like, I think HGA is kind of stumbling and bumbling along, and I think it's probably just a matter of time until people don't really care much about them anymore. And these other other companies that have been coming up over the last like 12 months, it like PSA opening up their services may spell their doom, but I think like them closing their services provided opportunity where maybe before there was none. Indeed.
Yeah, and with Beckett, I said it with ComC, I'll say it with Beckett. Senior leadership, management, when you have an issue there, it trickles down to all aspects of your business. All right, so next topic is what's going on right now. There's a little bit of lull in activity. Transaction volume on eBay is probably down quite a bit. Prices are down quite a bit. We're entering in a time of the year where usually, especially for the two of us who focus on modern baseball a little bit, with you do a lot of vintage as well. You do some other sports. I do some other sports, but we both kind of follow baseball, and we have for a number of years. And in the off season, it tends to be a little quiet. But generally, from a hobby standpoint, when you get into the non-vintage markets, I feel like between Thanksgiving or between like the first or second week of November into December, leading up to Christmas, sometimes the market is a little slow. We're seeing that right now. So do you think this is an issue of seasonality, or do you think it's just a downward hobby spiral that we're in?
It's definitely seasonality. And, we, as long as cards are continuing to break like over six figures in these huge auctions, I think the hobby is going to be just fine. Until like there's like a a depletion of supply of the high-end vintage and high-end modern that's like funneled through these huge auction houses like Heritage, REA, Golden, etc. Then I think the hobby's more in trouble because the big money is going to leave. But I mean, listen, like, we're getting close to Christmas. People are going to be traveling, which is a huge expense, more expensive now than maybe it has been in the last 12 months because there's a lot of demand for it. And people have money tied up in other places besides their disposable income for collectibles. I think it's always kind of been this way. And the conversation kind of like always comes up like, is the hobby okay? Is the market okay? I think it's just the time of year. And when we get like past January, I think it's going to come right back.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of like the Rudy from Alpha Investments saying, when things are really good, they're never as good as they seem. When things are really bad, they're never as bad as they seem. So it's it's difficult to not get lost up in the sentiment or what you think the sentiment might be. I tend not to have as simple of a look at it. Like I agree with you in the high end stuff, that it's very safe. The rare stuff is safe. The top 1 or 2% spending boatloads of money on the market. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. But with some of these lower end cards, and you've seen it a little bit, everybody's trying to consolidate, everybody's trying to trade. I set up at shows a lot. You deal a lot with buyers and sellers. You go to a lot of shows. There's a lot of people bringing their cards in Pelican cases. Cards could be worth in between $1 to $200 to maybe even $1,000, $2,000, and they're trying to trade maybe 2 or 3 cards, maybe a little bit of cash to upgrade, to consolidate, to get their hands on a better card, a more sought after card. So, and we've seen over the last, especially after the second quarter, we've seen a movement out of base, like the traditional base Prism cards and PSA 10s that maybe people underestimated the pop or the effect that their pop would have on the market. So we've seen a movement also away from silver prisms as well, which are quite more plentiful in recent years, at least from basketball and football perspective. And I think a lot of people thought, especially with basketball. And so I see that as people trying to get a little bit smarter. Maybe the flippers are leaving the market. People are trying to really think like, what card do I want to have 2 years from now? What card is going to stand the test of time? It could be a specific player, but ultimately that card matters too. And the print run and the pop reports, those are very, very important. So I think there's a lot of people that are just trying to figure out what are those traits that make a card an investor card or an investment grade card. And I think it's actually gotten a little bit trickier over the last few months because from a macroeconomic perspective, we're seeing maybe inflation fears, maybe a little bit of inflation. If you look at data, I know Ty over at BenchClear did a video. I'll link that in the show notes where he goes over like how much supplies have increased, how much the post office rates have increased, and every little thing that goes into the card selling process. And in addition to that, things like milk, coffee, things that everybody's buying. So maybe it's getting the right cards that are investment grade, but also will stand the test of time, factoring in some inflation. Which cards are really going to be those inflation hedges? Maybe 2-3 months ago, a lot of people thought that a second year LeBron James Topps Chrome refractor in a PSA 9 was safe, was an investment grade card. The pop is slightly over 100. There's not that many PSA 10s. It's not numbered, but they didn't make that many of them. There's far fewer than his rookie year refractors, at least in graded fashion, I believe. But now you see that card like drop 50%. And, maybe this isn't the greatest example, but because we're talking about ultra modern basketball or modern basketball, but ultra modern, or I guess modern cards, but a lot of LeBron stuff has slipped, 30 to 50% over the last few months, over the last 3 months. And this is a player that historically he hasn't been anchored to performance because his legacy is cemented. Over the last 2 or 3 years, he's been more anchored to the value of Kobe Bryant than of a Luka Doncic and a player that's hasn't really proven anything, where they will see those fluctuations based on day-to-day performances. So and also I don't know if this is a symptom of basketball as a market versus baseball as a market. Maybe we underestimated baseball as a sport. Yes, it's dying. As a hobby, it's got a lot of history associated with the vintage. The cards sell for more than other sports in vintage, even though there being more of them, right? Versus basketball and football, you know this. So it's got that, and you haven't seen these these legendary rises in value from year to year with baseball, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe the people that were sitting on, $500 in Giannis and Luka cards that all of a sudden became 10,000 overnight, not really overnight, but over the course of a few months, maybe those people holding those cards weren't as capitalized to begin with. Maybe they were over leveraged. We're dealing with a younger generation with these cards. We're dealing with people with different exit strategies with these cards. And maybe they weren't as able to stomach drops in value, which is causing kind of this panic race to the bottom. And maybe some of those people also had LeBron cards. Just one of the things I was thinking about that kind of separates LeBron from other sports. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I think like we all kind of knew, the people who have been kind of in a collector or a buyer or seller, like if you were in the hobby for more than 5 years at this point, I think we all kind of understood that like the modern basketball thing was had an expiration date. The entry point to modern overall any sport is more attainable and also probably a lot more attractive to someone who's just coming in than vintage is. Vintage is probably a little harder to comprehend because I think the argument can be made for modern too. There's a lot, right? And, I think like when you said, or when you alluded to like the population of cards, we can't forget that there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of collections that are in people's closets that they haven't touched in 15 years, or in storage units, or collections that people of all raw cards that people have no idea even what grading is. They're not on the internet. There's a lot of stuff out there. So I think it's like a little sometimes not short-sighted, but sometimes naive to think like this card is a low pop. Well, did they produce a lot of it? Are people grading a lot of this card? Is the card numbered? Like a low pop vintage card, if it's rare, doesn't always low pop doesn't really add any value, because low pop also may mean that there are fewer buyers for that card that may compete to win that card. Like there are plenty of cards in my own collection that are like pop 10 or less, but there may only be 10 people in the world that may want that card. So I think like when we get lost in population, and I think population has become like it's most important now, or has been most important now, and will continue to be important. But I think we can't get lost in population because it's a more complicated question than like, is that card on a pop report? BGS, SGC, PSA, like where is it? Because there are more of them out there. And then as far as LeBron goes, I don't understand why his card's going down. His card shouldn't be going down. Like if anything, it should be like vintage, a slow crawl up as he continues to reach the best, or like the all-time scoring lists, the rebounds lists, the games played, the championships. Like, he's getting into the twilights of his career. He's played 16 years or whatever it's been. Why are his cards going down?
Right.
It can't be because he tweeted something. That doesn't make any sense to me. And agree or disagree with his Twitter behavior or his politics or the things he stands for, doesn't matter. That shouldn't make a difference in like what people buy and sell and his market value.
Yeah. The only thing I think about with politics, it could, as there's like a large demographic of people that collect cards, maybe not basketball, but people in this hobby tend to sway one way versus the other. Maybe it gave people less of a reason to hold because they're like, well, I don't really like this guy. And the only reason why I was buying him is because the hobby said that he was the millennials GOAT, or like a safe player to buy, or he was a smart investment. And plus all these other things that you mentioned. He might have a chance to play with his kid. He might win another championship. He could go down in some people's perception as the GOAT or a GOAT, certainly a generational player. So yeah, I don't get it, but I try to, like, in my head, I'm trying to compare him to Mike Trout. Baseball, inferior sport from a hobby perspective, most would say, and I'd probably say that too still. And he doesn't have the cultural presence as LeBron. He's not globally recognized. He's been injured, I think, for a part of the last 5 seasons. He's missed time.
Trout's also having a tough time in the hobby right now.
Yeah, but even him, you look at his volatility versus LeBron over the last 3 years. I think you'd be surprised, and it's like, this is very interesting. And Trout, again, he's a guy that his legacy is not cemented. Yeah, he'll be a Hall of Famer if he was to retire tomorrow. But a couple of years ago, people were comparing him to Mickey Mantle, that he could potentially be one of the best ever. We have no idea what's going to happen to the second part of his career.
Still a possibility.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. I think he definitely has a chance to win a fourth MVP, which would be insane. I don't know though.
Well, think about this. Before he got hurt, do you remember his numbers before he got hurt? He was doing a lot.
Yeah.
Getting on base a ton. His slugging was way, way up. He was striking out he was not striking out at all. And then he got hurt and he didn't play again for the rest of the year, which was a shame because we lost out on a potentially amazing season from him.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And let's not forget, players when they hit their early 30s tend to hit a wall, and they decline statistically very fast. So we don't know if that's coming next year. We don't know what the effects will be from the calf injury. But let's not downplay the hiccups that could come with a recovery from an injury that really kept him out for the full season. Calf strain, kind of weird. But all right, last topic. Josh Luber was interviewed on Sports Cards Nonsense, Mike Giuseppe's podcast. And it was quite a long interview. I think the full episode was about an hour long, but I think maybe 40 minutes, 50 minutes of the actual interview. Link again in the show notes to that. Definitely check that out. So I'm curious as to your thoughts there, Brian. What did you think about what you heard?
There was a lot that was in that interview. Going in, because I only listened to it for the first time last night in preparation for this conversation. So I already had some preconceived ideas about what I felt about the Fanatics acquisition. I think the fact that he has a collector mindset is interesting because I think on the front end that works to his advantage in terms of perception and probably to our advantage because we hope that a collector having this much control over what's going on will do good things, and things that we've been asking for and wanting. That's the positive part. The negative part, I'm not such a huge fan of his strategy in terms of trying to limit. Well, he's talking about out of both sides of his mouth during the interview, and Mike kind of called him on this. He talked first about the scarcity and the blind Dutch auction of this is how many we're going to have, and you're going to bid it up, and it'll be blind, and then people will then pay the lowest amount. But that process eliminates so many potential buyers. If you just put the stuff in the retail, I'm sure that you can speak to this more than I do. I can confidently, but retail for a while worked really well, but then people began to pick stuff off the shelf, resell it or break it or whatever. And that's kind of when the cycle came. But I don't know if the answer is to be we're producing 20,000 cases of this stuff and you can decide what you're all going to pay for it. And then after that, then dictate the demand for this product after you have it. But then he said it should be everywhere. It should be in Target. It should be in Wawa. It should be in Toys R Us doesn't exist anymore, but it should be in Walmart, 7-Eleven, and everywhere. So it's like, what do you want? I also didn't like the fact that like he wants a lot of products, and I think like that dilutes the greatest stuff in the hobby. Like if we have, and he loves the fact that we have 40 different baseball products and 40 different basketball products that like kind of all look the same and all do all the same. Like it's all the same, really. And I think his stance is pretty tough to wrap my head around. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts about it for sure, because we haven't talked about this interview yet.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he says a couple times, like, I want to 10x the hobby. Well, the only way to do that is to get product out to more places that it hasn't been before, advertise in different ways, create maybe new innovative products. He talked about being creative. So I think with the primary market stuff, where he was giving that example of the blind Dutch auction, as opposed to what Panini does, the reverse blind Dutch auction. I think that would only apply to certain products. Not all, where you would truly list the amount available prior to the auction itself. Because I agree with you. If you start doing that with everything, then it's like, and he even admitted people end up paying more than they initially would have paid winning it in a blind Dutch auction. So it's like, well, then I started in my head to think like, well, in a reverse blind Dutch auction, the way Panini does it, where everybody pays a different amount, would the average person pay more than what they would pay in a non-reverse auction? Then in my head, I'm thinking like, well, I don't know. I could see it either way. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. He's always been obsessed with, and I've talked about this in a previous video, but he's been obsessed with the idea of the primary market. He did it with Bowman Chrome X. I think that was the first time they did it with cards versus shoes or other apparel. I don't know how successful it was, but it might've been on the product itself, just not being a great hit. Kind of a weird product, buying like pre-graded cards, and the best hit you can get is like was it a green refractor of like a rookie card of Tatis or Vlad? Just kind of weird. And at the time, there weren't a whole lot of those hit-based products that were getting much success. So I'm not gonna completely say that it's a bad idea. It won't work. I think it might work with the right products. And I'll give him a lot of credit. I trust his ability to be like an innovative visionary. Where I start to get a little skeptical, and I think this is kind of different from Mike Gio's take and Jesse's take, is this is just one person. I know he's the chief visionary officer, is his title, the CVO, and the functioning CEO, but there are still leagues that need to be on board. There are going to be, at some point, probably shareholders that are going to want to make sure that profit is maximized. There's this guy Michael Rubin that he works with that is much more of a kind of a capitalist driven, business first type person. So he can say all he wants about like limiting aspects of what they truly disrupt. But when he did mention areas that they would disrupt, I think we should definitely take note of that. And for me, that was the distribution chain. Talking about right now how a lot of breakers are locked in because of seniority, because of relationships they have, and they're making a killing. Mike even said, Mike used to own a breaking business. I think maybe he still has some, I don't know, equity with it. I don't know. But he had said that there's a lot of breakers out there, 50 or so, that are making multi-millions per year. So they want to disrupt that. And
imagine that, by the way.
I know, it's insane. It's insane. And a lot of these people haven't been maybe running their business the right way. They're just relying on high margins based on the entry point of these products they're able to buy. And just being maybe one of the first or second or first 10 breakers around, they've been able to kind of keep that going. So Gio says like you should really have spent your time focusing on building out your brand, connecting with people in a way where they'll still be around if you were to lose this huge advantage at buying directly from distributors or Topps Panini at certain prices. So I agree with that. As somebody who doesn't have any direct relationships, I would benefit a lot from that because I've been able to kind of maintain a brand, build a brand without just relying on simple cost. So
right, and how nice is that for you? Like you don't have to worry about worrying about your allocation. Like you're buying from someone else who already has an allocation. But like the person who then has the allocation has been relying on that, like an LC, not to divert you, but like an LCS who like has been who's had an account with Panini for like 25 years, and it's like, you're done. But why? Another thing that he mentioned that I didn't love is that he said that like in all markets, someone has to lose. I don't like that. Like, why do people have to lose? Why can't we all win? Why can't we all have like the enjoyment that we want to have in the hobby? Like, why can't everyone rip? Why can't everyone grade cards? Why can't everyone go to a card show that doesn't cost them $10 to get in? Why, like, there's so many like barriers. Like, why create like another horrible barrier in in someone's entry into the hobby?
Yeah. Well, part of me appreciates the fact that he understands the balance between, what would be the best case scenario for everybody, and what's really realistic. He talked about how if you grow the hobby, you also have to kind of, there's a balance or a trade-off with that in actually creating long-lasting value of these cards. If you're going to be creating more of them, it's kind of what he's saying, is what he's implying there. So I like the fact that he at least addressed that. It shows that he's sensitive to it. It shows that he understands it. And he's not trying to kind of like beat around the bush with, okay, everybody's gonna get happy. I mean, with so much transformation that will happen with a monopolistic like environment, I mean, there's gonna be a lot of drawbacks to it. There's gonna be a lot of people that are frustrated, people that'll leave. I don't think you can avoid that. Now, so another thing that I think we should definitely pay attention to, they spent a couple sentences on it, maybe a minute, was talking about NFTs and his obsession with primary market. Ultimately, as a more fair way to distribute products is the way he positioned it, but it's also a way for that manufacturer to capital the most amount of margin. And with NFTs, they kind of go hand in hand with that primary market concept, because you're technically creating something with like infinite profit potential, and
Right.
you have the potential to profit off each transaction, not just the first one, but all ensuing transactions as well. So he talked about how they have the benefit of not being a true startup. They've got money behind them, and they've got a number of years before they can roll this all out. So it'll be very interesting to see what they come up with, because they have very few barriers from that perspective. Where I start to get skeptical is an area where he kind of danced around, but this goes back to like Josh Luber is a visionary, but like what's the most business smart thing for Fanatics to do as a company that will soon be, I think, publicly traded at some point, with shareholders, with this profit sharing agreement with the league. The leagues are going to want to maximize the profits as well. And that comes with hobby shops. So he says he wants to 10x the hobby shops. Okay, but are they going to be independent hobby shops run by the typical Joes that own them now? Or maybe the ones that have sprung up in the last few years? Or are they going to be Fanatics run hobby shops? Maybe that was just a matter of just like a simple clarification. Maybe there's gonna be a combination of both, but with Fanatics having such like a retail store presence already, and especially like connected with stadiums and stuff, why wouldn't they at least try to build that out, especially since it would give them full control of, being able to market this and truly grow it beyond what they have. But I think they're relying on people to also grow the market. So I think killing hobby shops or making it infeasible for those that have one or want to do one independently, I think it'd be stupid to put those guys out of business. I think they're being smart about that, and also allowing breakers to truly emerge based on their brand. I mean, the breakers, give them as much flack as you want, but they're growing the community. They're no different than a content creator that has 10 to 20,000 views. They're making this bigger and more prosperous for everyone. They're growing the size of the pie. They're getting more people interested in the hobby. Jab's family probably got a ton of people interested in the hobby. Again, with tons of criticism, but people like this have been hugely beneficial to others. Maybe they didn't go about it in the right ways. A lot of these breakers maybe, took advantage of people. I don't know. I don't really do the group breaking thing, but you definitely have to appreciate them. They're a very important cog. And I think this whole method of him trying to redoing the distribution chain, I think that'll be hugely beneficial for getting those people to finally be in a better place, to be more profitable, and to be more successful, because those are the people that are truly driving the hobby.
But don't you feel that like the direct to consumer model will cut out the LCS completely? Because why do they need to sell to LC, like that model? Like, why do LCSs need an allocation at all?
Maybe Fanatics' vision for how LCSs fit is different than the typical ones that started popping up in the 80s and 90s, some of which are still around. Maybe they don't want them to rely on product. Maybe they want them to have a breaking presence and some sort of an online brand like Card Collector 2, Santiago Sports. Maybe that's their idea of a hobby shop. And those types of businesses can still profit without having a huge allocation of wax, if done right. So, but then again, how much room is there for those hobby shops? How many influencers are there to have hobby shops?
Right.
Yeah. So I think they'll have to be heavily transformed. To your point, the primary market obsession, the obsession with disrupting the distribution chain, which they probably should do because they can do it. Again, this is business first. This is capitalism at its finest. Josh is a nice guy. He's like collector, air quotes. We're all collectors. Gary Vee's a collector. Vegas Dave was a collector that set up at shops when he was 11 and flipped cards. And, if Gary Vee's a collector, then Vegas Dave is too. And so is Josh Luber. Josh Luber just tends to collect sneakers as well, and maybe video games. But
like going back to like the LCS thing, because I think that like the LCS is so important for the hobby. If you're a parent and you're trying to get your child into collectibles, the easiest way to get them in is take them to an LCS where they can like go and look at like thousands of cards if they want to, or not. Like if you make the LCS thing like only like the Card Collector 2, the Santiago Sports, the RBI Crew 7, like the mega like humongous monster that like some of these LCSs have like turned into, then like that's like, is that the direction? But like, why does Fanatics get to like dictate the direction of the hobby? They're just a manufacturer. They're a brand. But like the hobby is not a brand. It's not the hobby brought to you by Fanatics. It's not Topps brought to you by Fanatics yet. We don't know. But like, why does Fanatics get to like dictate like all of this stuff? They don't. The hobby is like a universe, and they are like a planet, like a big planet in the universe, and they don't get to like connect all these dots. It's just not fair.
Yeah, and maybe Josh's influence is helping there a little bit. Like, okay, this is what you want to do, but this is really what's best for the hobby. So an example of that could be what he said about grading, perhaps, and what he said about I don't know if it was ever in play to begin with, but it was interesting how open he was about like, oh yeah, we don't want Fanatics branded cards. I really don't think that's going to happen. So that could be a good thing. And then the grading thing, he talks about the importance of grading. Talked about that a little bit earlier with like one of the first topics, but how it's helped the hobby evolve, how it's important to create frictionless transactions in the space, creates more transparency, which is good for any market. So it's interesting how he's saying that, but doesn't Michael Rubin have some ownership of the parent company of CSG?
There are encapsulated cards on Fanatics website. They're not graded, right, but they're encapsulated.
Right. So it'll be interesting to see what they do there. But they I don't know if they feel confident about competing directly with, he calls them the incumbents, the big three, I believe. So it'd be interesting to see what they have planned there. But I think that's probably refreshing for some people to at least hear Josh acknowledge that would be quite difficult, and independent grading is very important.
Yeah, like how much of a conflict of interest would it be for like the Fanatics to control the process of like producing and manufacturing the card, and then also like, let's also grade this card, and then like let's package it. Like that's just controlling too much of the way that things have always been. And I agree that like the hobby needs an injection of technology and some innovation, but we don't need like a rework of this thing. Like this is not a broken system that we've all been living in for ever since the 1930s. Like this thing works. Like we don't need someone here to come in and change everything.
It's only broken from a profitability standpoint, and that's what they'll focus on first.